going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our more than weekly show at this point, where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are here with the final Kamigawa Neon Dynasty story, and that being then the final Kamigawa Neon Dynasty side story as well, with story number 5. We've talked about this. It's not a perfect numbering system, but it is the 5th side story technically, called The Foes Who Make Us by Abby May Otis. My quick review at the top, this story is awesome.
May she Otis or may she not?
Yes, exactly. This story's great. I loved it. I thought it was a great way to end it. Like, this is the final story that came out for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and while it is, but also isn't, like, it's not impactfully canon for like the next time we come back to Kamigawa, I still thought it was a great read, very entertaining, very emotional, and so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was really good. For a final story though?
Sure. It's not...
It was kind of lackluster.
That's fair. I think it... I guess I was getting at the fact that it just left me in a good mood going into the other stories, but otherwise, yeah, I guess that's a very good point.
Yeah, I liked the story a lot, but that's... I don't have a ton more to say about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I have some things written here, but it's drastically less than what I've written for most of the other stories from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. So, before we get into the full review itself, first of all, if you have not gotten a chance to read this story for yourself and you would like to, or you did but you want a reminder, whatever the case may be, the link to this story so that you can read it for yourself is the top link in the description down below. So definitely go down there, check that out. But also, in that description, you will see links to some of our other channels. And while you're on those channels, or while you're on this channel, if you enjoy, that was great, if you enjoy the things that we do, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. Again, here on Geek for All, over on Video Games for All, or Gluten Free for All as well. We've been doing some incredible stuff over on Video Games for All. Amy has been doing some awesome stuff over on Gluten Free for All. And so you don't want to miss out on any of that. And so, like I said, we definitely recommend that you sub and ring that bell. Likes and shares go a long way to help us out, and so we really appreciate that. But subscribing and ringing the bell helps you out a lot so that you get those notifications. And then, when we are live every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time right here on this channel, you will get notifications for that as well. If you're a fan of Magic the Gathering, every Monday we play MTG Arena on Magic Monday, and then on Fridays we play whatever video game we happen to be playing. This Friday, we will be continuing our playthrough of X-Men Legends 2: Rise of Apocalypse. So, thank you for bearing with us for that. We really appreciate any and all support that you are all willing to give. It means a lot. And I have to say, Video Games for All is growing precipitously, and I really appreciate that from any and all of you that are supporting us over there as well.
It means a lot to us.
Yes, and people are enjoying it. So, if you're interested, that's where it's, you know, new stuff is happening there. People are really enjoying that stuff. So definitely go check that out. So, I had to say that with this story, like onto the full review itself, I guess I should say. I have to say with this story, that first like section before the line delineating like passage of time, that first little section, I mean, you can probably attest to this as well, reminded me of the Midnight Hunt and Crimson Vow side stories where they were horror-based. And this was just as good as a full-length horror story that we read. And this was just like a couple of paragraphs.
Yeah.
But we walked out of there just being like, oh God, that's awful. And then for it to kind of branch into what it did was even better, but obviously the rest of the story was not horror-based. It was just kind of working off of that horrible thing. I was a little confused with what was going on with the attack, as it was mentioned, because a lot of the story was broken into a couple of different points. It was 10 minutes before the attack, 10 years after the attack, 12 years after the attack, and then 12 years and 6 months after the attack. But of course, that warrants the question, what attack? Because the first thing that went through my mind, especially because it was set in a Ganjo, the first section, where it said before the attack, my first thought was, is this the attack that Rizona and the uprisers did on the Aganjo Temple in the last main story. Because then if so, I was very confused as to why we were now 10 and 12 years after, and really 10 years after, because then during that section, that's when they explained what the attack was. It was just the attack from that kami, so it was very like Heiko and Norika centered in terms of the attack. So unless that news very widely spread, which I mean, I guess the folks in the hospital would have to know that there was an attack because they were helping treat Norika, and then any other family members that would have known or whatever the case may be. So maybe it spread a little bit more than that. The fact that it was just called The Attack seemed a little odd to me at first. They eventually explained it away, so it made sense at that point. But I wrote about it because we were at that point in the story, and I'm like, what attack are we talking about?
Yeah.
So thankfully it resolved it relatively quickly, so it was fine. I was interested by the kind of soup line in Sokenzenshi, where they were going for the rice soup. And they were kind of lined up in the cold. But the way that it was presented from Heiko's perspective was that it was like a warm and positive atmosphere. Because as we come to find out during the story, these people are a family. They all care for one another. They help one another. As opposed to kind of a more traditional one of those soup lines that maybe we would experience, at least that I would be aware of here in this country, in the United States where we live, or something like that. Or she even mentions different from the Pilgrims line as they wait to go meet with they would go wait to meet with the Emperor. And so again, it's kind of, it seemed like kind of a refugee type situation there, where they're like seeking relief or something like that, housing, etc. And they have to seek out the Emperor for that assistance. Where those kinds of things, again, the Pilgrim line and what we might experience here in this country, might be a little bit more melancholy or kind of an upsetting thing. She noted that this food line, while one that was definitely needed for the people who were in it, right, where presumably if they weren't in that line, they just wouldn't eat, it still was not kind of a downtrodden, somber experience. It was more warm and welcoming, which I thought was interesting. That again, they kind of took that concept and that trope and were able to turn it on its head. And then again, throughout the course of the story, kind of show you why that was the case. Show you more than tell you that it was that family environment that the uprisers were kind of presenting to the world. Or
it
to
made
the
me
people.
think of your dad doing Ronald McDonald House.
Yes. Yeah, my father, we can tell the story briefly. My father volunteers with Ronald McDonald House Charities and goes to the local Ronald McDonald House near his home once a month and makes food. He and some other volunteers make food and serve it to the folks living in Ronald McDonald House. If you're unfamiliar, very briefly, Ronald McDonald House is a home, or like, you know, it's almost like a hotel, but like a mini version of a hotel near children's hospitals, where families whose children are in children's hospitals for the long haul or for an extended period of time for whatever reason, they can stay in the Ronald McDonald House free of charge so that they can be there for their child who is undergoing these treatments or surgeries or all of the above, whatever the case may be. And so once a month, like I said, he and some other volunteers go and serve food to these families. And sometimes the families get to sit and chat, and other times, as my dad has told us, the families show up, grab the food, and just leave, because they are either headed right back to the hospital, or they're just taking a quick break, whatever the case may be. And of course, never any judgments on any of those folks, you know. God bless each and every one of them who are dealing with that stuff.
Well, he said, you know, prior to COVID, it was much more of like a sit down, take your time, enjoy the meal, you know, be grateful for it, and enjoy yourself kind of an atmosphere.
Yeah.
During COVID, obviously, it was much more of a come, pick it up, and leave situation, but... Yeah,
and now that things are some... regulations, that's the word I was looking for. I'm like, why can't I think of this word? Well, now that some regulations are becoming a little bit more relaxed, maybe that will change, maybe it won't, who knows? But
prior to COVID, it was a much more family esque atmosphere.
Yeah.
Which is what reminded me of that.
Right. And again, he would come home telling these people stories, and some of them were, I mean, just heartbreaking.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and sometimes you hear really good news from those situations as well. So that was always really nice too. So, but yes, that's a kind of an interesting point that, like, then if the folks who show up get to actually have like a nice conversation, then it can be a positive experience where, you know, as opposed to, like we were saying.
I mean, and it really is a positive experience. The Ronald McDonald House portion of it.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, we're dealing with this kind of awful aspect of what our lives have to be right now. And this is kind of the you know, shining light in all of that to kind of help us out in our moment of need.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And again, people who are better off or available to be able to do that, really, really cool.
Yeah.
So, shout outs to my dad, I guess.
And shout outs to Ronald McDonald House. And see if there's one near you that you can volunteer at. That's
a really good point. If that's something you're interested in, absolutely no harm in reaching out.
No.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, they do, you know, home cooked stuff because they have a full kitchen, so they'll cook stuff and bring it and then heat it up, or they'll cook it right there on site. They'll just get there a little bit earlier and cook it on site. So whatever it happens to be. I know that we have some folks in our chat who talk about loving cooking and stuff like that. So, you know, if you're that type of a person and that's something you're interested in doing, why not? Check it out.
Help some people out.
I was a little curious with the mech situation in that soup line, though. Like, the mechs show up and they're, like, doling out tickets for, like, people standing in the road. And then the mech gets hit with a snowball. And then people, like, start taking their robes off or their like, cloaks or whatever that they're wearing off. And they've got all this technology on. Yeah. It seemed like it was a purposeful ambush. Right? But they didn't go any further into that. It was just kind of used as a way for Heiko to show Chai that she was interested in helping them being the uprisers or whatever. And then that's kind of where it ended. So I was a little confused as to whether that was purposeful or just the opportunity arose and so they took it, you know?
Yeah.
But anyway, then, of course, Heiko does, like I said, end up joining the uprisers with Rizona and Chai in that particular instance, but then it's really all of them. I loved the descriptions and the discussion for Norika, who becomes someone who experiences chronic pain.
Yeah.
That was so well done. I really liked that a lot. And I liked... I think I've talked about him in the past, but I have a very, very close friend from childhood who passed away many years ago at this point. But he was severely disabled. And while that's not exactly the same, and I'm not trying to compare them in that way, all I'm saying is the reference that they made to Norika being there and being such a presence, but then being absent for long stretches of time when there is a flare-up or whatever the case may be that the story brought up, that spoke to me a lot. Because when my friend, was having a tough time, there would be a week or so where he wouldn't be around, and I'd keep asking his aide. You know, his aide would come in and check in with me and say, hey, you know, he's having a tough time, but he's doing okay. I'd call his parents and see how he was doing, whatever the situation needed to be. But so I get that fully, where you spend a lot of time with this person. They are ever present and a great shining light, and then you're kind of reminded of it. Because I mean, obviously it's there, but it's not something that's like in the forefront of your mind as someone who's interacting with that person. It's obviously, you know, a constant in their world, but then you're kind of reminded of that more negative aspect of their existence when it's like, oh, right, they're not going to be around for a little while because they need to be dealing with this awful thing that they have to put up with on
ridiculous bullshit that just never goes away.
Yeah, I was going to say that they're putting up with on a daily, aka constant basis. Right. So I loved it. I thought it was incredibly well done in this story. Like,
And that's absolutely what I thought of too when you read that part of the story that they wrote.
Was my friend?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, it just please, I have dealt with that before. And I also wanted to point out, I'm aware that, representation is important, and it doesn't just have to do with racial representation.
Okay.
It does have to do with racial representation. It doesn't just have to do with racial. And so,
but it's really any protected class or any class that's not protected too. I mean, there's plenty of other things that people are that they need to be, represented.
yeah.
Mental illness, which is something we talk about in almost every single one of these episodes.
Yeah.
Is something that's a huge deal for the representation in these stories, and so I'm grateful for that, and that's the reason why I care about continuing to read the stories and do these JaARs.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a tiny bit. I think Amy might have something to say about that later, but not a ton. There's
Okay.
not, actually I don't want to speak for you, but I don't imagine there would be a lot, but we'll see. But yeah, I agree. Very, very nice that they're actually getting those other groups in there, and I think, I'm not part of that class, so I can't really speak for them, but I would like to think that it, in this instance, did a fair bit of justice for them in that particular character.
Yeah.
There's a quote here that we wrote down that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to, but I think we both did.
Okay.
The quote is, Heiko feels a stab of pain she can't bear, so she transmutes it back to anger. Yeah. This was during the discussion between Heiko and Norika, they're kind of both throwing verbal jabs back and forth at one another. But we talked about this last episode or 2 episodes ago, whatever it was, that anger is not a primary emotion. And here it flat out says it. It's like she was experiencing pain and hurt that arguably may have been shame as well, because it was kind of something being thrown in her face. And so instead of acknowledging that and living in that pain, emotional pain, she instead lashed out in anger.
Right.
Anger was not the primary emotion there. It's what we were talking. So if you needed an example for, when we discussed it last time and you weren't quite understanding it, here you go. Here's one.
Right.
She felt pain, but transmuted it. That's the word they used. Transmutes it back to anger.
Right.
Awesome. That line is great. So good. And what we've really been talking about. But also, let's not forget the first part of that. Heiko feels a stab of pain she can't bear.
Yeah.
So again,
how powerful, right?
well, not even that. Well, yes, and maybe this is where you're going. I want to flat out state it. Pain that she can't bear in comparison to Norika, who is constantly in pain. Mm-hmm. I loved that. I like both, because I wrote it because of the anger thing, because we just talked about that. But it's both. It's 2 things. And for one quote, really powerful.
Well, constant pain, because it's constant, is so much more bearable than a sharp out of nowhere kind of pain.
Sure.
That you're not expecting necessarily or already know how to deal with because you don't deal with, consistently having pain.
Right. Well, and I was going to say the type of person that doesn't experience constant pain isn't as easy. It's not as easy for them. Yeah. Fair point.
Yeah. So, but I just think that's so powerful, just comparing the two, like you said.
Yeah.
It's just yeah. And then the fact that oh, okay, she can't bear it, so she's instantly going to on purpose change it into anger and let that affect her in a very different but just as destructive or more destructive way.
Yeah.
And it's very much along the lines of what we were talking about last episode, where we were just like, you know, people and these decisions that they make are based on, you know, having this much information about the world around them, you know, and then it's hard for the rest of us to then look at the terrible thing that they've done and forgive them. And it's really not about forgiving them, right? It's about applying understanding to the fact that they're doing what they're doing because it's based on this information instead of this information.
Yeah, to keep track of the last 2 episodes that we did, last week's and last Mondays and last Thursdays, because this concept will make a lot more sense to you if you haven't seen those. But yes, perfect.
If you have seen them.
If you once you've seen them, yes, right. Yeah. Sorry. That section of the story, by the way, is 100% my favorite, where the two of them are kind of hurling insults back and forth at each other, but like, again, it's not, they weren't planning this. This came out of nowhere for both of them. Kind of Heiko more so than Norika, I think, because there was that discussion of whether Norika knew that Heiko was there or not, and Norika kind of felt like she knew that she was there. But there's that moment of the two of them kind of going back and forth with one another, and it's just so powerfully done. Right? And being honest with one another and upfront about things.
Yeah.
And so I loved it. If you read no other parts of the story, find that about 3/4 of the way down where they like really confront each other.
Yeah, and that was really great. Seems like that honesty had been a long time coming. Like, it wasn't something that they had really done much.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that Norika states that she's actually there to forgive her, right? That word that you used. She was there to forgive her being Heiko. Not Aiko. Damn it, Amy. You brought it up. I thought it was
a bit difficult that in this story there was a character named Heiko, and in the last story there was a character named Aiko.
Not the last, but many stories. The main story.
Many stories of the main stories. This is a side story.
Yeah.
But the main stories had a character named Aiko.
Yeah, good point. But I like that because Norika is forgiving her, or there to forgive her, and then kind of Heiko's lashing out and saying, like, you're doing all these things to hurt these people, like, you don't even know anything about them. And Norika's like, cool, then show me.
Right.
Take me there, I care. And of course, by the end of the story, you don't technically know if she actually does care.
Right.
She could be using her diplomacy to just get through that situation, because she would die. She would be dead otherwise. Right. Norika would. So she could just be using her diplomacy to get through this, and now she's back with her people at the end, and she could continue kind of subjugating the people of Sokensen. I don't think she's going to, but the story does leave it open where that could be the situation. Another quote that we wrote down that I'm sure you wanted to talk about it even briefly. Her, meaning Heiko here, her second family could reject her as easily as the first.
Yeah. Ugh. That line just kind of hurt. I don't really have anything real to say about that. It's just, for those of us who feel that line hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's a thing. I have many friends. I am extremely fortunate that I have a very large, loving, and caring family. I'm fully aware that is a privilege, and I try my best not to take that lightly. But I also know many who don't have that, or didn't have that, and had to grow and find their own, make their own. And that's that concept of that second family, and then, like you were commenting on, the fact that it's probably, there are many people who would probably be quite guarded with forming that second family because they're aware of what it was like with the first one.
Right.
And that if that second family rejects you, and that's the family that you chose, that's possibly, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but that's possibly even worse.
Right.
Because the first family, you didn't choose them, that you're placed with that, or you're born into that family.
Yes, but there's also that component of biology where you're supposed to be able to trust that your biological family will love you from like an instinctual kind of standpoint.
Sure.
And that's just not the way it is.
Yeah.
It's just not.
And then the story ends. But the story ends with these two family members. They're cousins, by the way, if you have not read the story and you're not aware. These two ladies are cousins. They end... They kind of talk to one another and they decide that they are not enemies. But they're not sure if they're allies yet either. And that's kind of what I was getting at before, is that you don't know what Norika is actually thinking when she walks away. Because she walks away back with the Imperials. And then Heiko turns around and, as the quote says, walks, quote, where she knows her family awaits her.
Right.
Because it's that second family that we were just talking about. Because she just left Norika, who is her actual blood relative.
Right.
And yet turns around and walks away from Norika, where she knows her family awaits her.
Right.
Really awesome. Really, really cool. And again, I just really liked it. I liked this story. It was good.
Yeah. And again, I'll just say, like, for those of us that feel that, it's a big deal. Having to walk away from your actual family to people who actually love you. It's important. It's healthy. It's beneficial.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. Anyway.
Yeah.
In a huge way.
Yeah.
Especially if you feel a sense of duty or responsibility or trust or love or compassion or any of the things that you probably feel.
Yeah.
I have been, God, it's probably been 2 years now for me at this point. Maybe not quite so long.
Oh, it's around there, I think.
Since I basically decided to walk away from my biological family. And then, of course, communications kind of petered out in a more gradual way. But they did peter out. And it has been a while now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It was just so many months of agonizing, trying to decide whether it was the right choice, trying to just get over the feeling that it wasn't the right thing to do to just leave them behind, knowing full well that the reason why they are the way they are is the same reason why I am the way I am. And, knowing full well that they need the love and compassion that they can't provide to me. Which is why they can't provide it. Because they need it. And it's just really hard to, like, give up on people who part of you still loves.
Yeah, for better or worse, and whether you want to or not.
Because you know that they don't love you as much. Or at all.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
So, I won't talk more about it. It's...
If you all want to talk more about it,
yeah,
you can leave it in the comments, or you are 100%, if you are comfortable doing so in a somewhat public space, but not really. There's like a few people and they're awesome individuals. You are truly, I'm not even trying to get you to like watch more of our stuff or whatever. Come to a stream.
yeah.
Amy is the one who checks on the chat on a consistent basis. So come in, say hi, and if you want to talk about it, say, hey, I watched that last episode of JaAR. I also made that choice, or I'm struggling with making that choice, or whatever. The people, like I said, the other folks in chat are awesome individuals.
Right.
Amy just told you her experience with it as well. So if that's something that
I'll talk to you about it.
Exactly. So if that's something you're interested in doing, please feel free to do so. If you want otherwise to private message us on Facebook or Twitter, those are on the channel page itself. Or if you're on our channel page and you go to the About section, there's our email as well. And you're more than welcome to send us an email. If again, anything that you might want to talk about, or if no offense taken, if you wanted to just be somebody who's actually experienced it, that is also totally fine. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your experiences, whether they be similar to ours, different from ours, whatever the case may be.
Or just leave a comment on this video.
That's what I think I said that at the beginning. If I didn't, I apologize.
think you skipped it.
Sorry. Yes, you're more than welcome to just leave it in the comments as well, of course. And in fact, anything that we talked about for this video, we would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Super important to continue and keep that conversation going. And again, if you can take moments from this story about family, relate it to yourself, and like come to some conclusions about your own life, or make some hard choices about your life, that's a great way. You don't have to, but that's actually a really cool way of all of you joining us as we show off our
#4thos Pride.
That's right. Very interesting story, like you said, to end it with, not necessarily like a good finale, but the finale of the main story was a good finale. So, and we talked about that.
And I think, like you said before, especially considering all the dark things that actually exist in this story, it's a pretty feel-good ending.
Yeah, agreed. That's why, I'm hopeful and happy looking forward, because this Thursday, barring any issues with us filming, this Thursday will be the first JaAR where we discuss the Streets of New Capenna stories. I'm looking forward to it. I know you are as well, and I hope you are as well. So definitely stay tuned. Like we mentioned before, don't forget to sub, ring the bell, all that fun stuff. Check out our other channels, etc. We'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.